and welcome to this edition of the Building Trust in Trying Times webinar. I'm your host, Dale Dixon. So good to have you with us for this webinar on cybersecurity. And you might be asking, why cybersecurity with all this going on in the world right now? Where are our stimulus payments? But here's the reason why. The bad guys, the bad actors in the world know that with so many people working at home, now is a perfect time to target small business, and cybersecurity is a significant threat. And something to be paying attention to. So we want you to be able to protect your business. One of the BBB standards for trust is safeguard privacy. That falls directly under this idea of cybersecurity. And today we're really fortunate to have an expert in this field guide us through the process to make sure that our remote workers are being as safe as possible, that our businesses are protected as possible. Jody Ito is the Chief Information Security Officer with the University of Hawaii System, and she works out of the Office of the Vice President for Information Technology. She's been there at the university since 1982, holding this position since the year 2000. She is responsible for the security and protection of the information assets across the entire University of Hawaii system. And these policies and these responsibilities include the development and management of policies and procedures for the UH Information Security Program. That means that she's conducting risk and vulnerability analysis for critical assets. She oversees investigations into cyber incidents. She's also developing and conducting training on information policy and security issues across all 10 University of Hawaii campuses and affiliated research and education centers. Jody is also an active founding member of the newly organized Cyber Hawaii and co-chairs the Educational Workforce Development Committee. So we do have a tremendous expert to talk to us today about cybersecurity. Jody, thank you so much for being with us.
Aloha, everyone, and thank you so much for that very warm welcome and introduction. Let me just go ahead and start sharing my screen right now, because I do have a presentation that I would like to share with you that has a lot of information in it. And I apologize in advance if it goes pretty quickly. But as Dale mentioned, cybersecurity is very important to consider in this era of COVID-19. This is really an unprecedented time. And while working from home has been around for a long time, what makes this different is that this massive shift for the majority of our workforce to go from working in the offices that had protections, cyber protections in place, to now having to move to work from home, and a lot of times using your own personally owned devices without the same protections is really an issue. I apologize. And so, one of the things that we really need to think about is what kinds of risks are we assuming now that we're in the stay-at-home, work-from-home environment. So really what I want to talk about today is like this new normal, and also specifically talk about the cyber risks that you're going to be challenged with in this new times. So there are a lot of security companies right now that are providing a number of different reports. And everywhere you turn, if you were to just go ahead and search in your browsers for COVID-19 scams and threats, you're going to come up with a lot of information. And what's happening is that the cyber criminals are taking advantage of everybody searching for information related to COVID-19. And then they're going to be leveraging this new age where people are searching for information to try to take advantage of this situation to get what they want, which is either your credentials, could be your bank account, it could be trying to redirect payments. It's also just trying to get you to click on malicious software and get your computers infected. So this is so much of an issue that the FBI and a lot of other federal agencies are issuing a lot of warnings. So as you can see on this screen, and I will have a link to this page at the end of the presentation in a resources slide. But this FBI is compiling a lot of the different types of scams and threats that they're seeing coming up from our cyber criminal environments now. So please, when you have some time, take advantage of this resource and learn a little bit more about what's going on. what kinds of threats are facing you as businesses in this new era. So the three things I really want to talk about today is what are the risks when we're transitioning from work from home, transitioning to work from home from our normal business environments. So specifically looking at the cyber threats that are now facing us, what are the new things that attackers are doing? Talking about risks to your assets. How do you know how to identify those risks? And what do you do when everybody wants to do video conferencing? I'm sure that you've all heard about Zoom being under the microscope now for security and privacy concerns. However, just upfront, Zoom is no different than any of the other video conferencing solutions out there. It's just that when they ramped up from about 10 million users to about 200 million users in a very short period of time, really it has more eyes and more people scrutinizing some of their privacy and security policies and actually looking harder to look for security vulnerabilities. And lastly, I do want to talk about best practices, really trying to give you some takeaway, tangible things that you can do to help your workforce protect themselves, as well as to protect your businesses. So real quick, some of the cyber threats, I talked about it, is cyber criminals are opportunists. They're looking for any opportunity to get you to click on this email malicious attachment or go visit a website that might have malicious code embedded in it. The goal is that they're trying to get control over your accounts, email accounts and financial accounts, as well as your computers and computing resources. You have relationships with your vendors and suppliers. They might want to take advantage of that. And then they're leveraging all of the COVID-related situations to develop new phishing lures, as we call them. What would make people, click on an email or click on a link or open up a malicious attachment? So right now, I understand there's new phishing emails going around that have malware-infected documents about the CARES Act, or how do you get additional financial funding? How do you apply for loans, right? So they're taking advantage of that right now, and they're very quick and very adaptable. They also are doing social engineering. They're impersonating government officials. They're trying to take advantage of our generous nature and then doing donation scams. They're trying to prey upon you so that you want to buy masks and protective equipment. And so again, they are very skilled at taking advantage of you and your workers. And the other thing that they're doing is doing targeted phishing. We call this spear phishing. And they're trying to inject themselves into the supply chain, especially targeting critical infrastructures. So for those of you that are supporting defense industries or some of the 17 critical infrastructures such as energy, water, transportation, IT infrastructure. So those are the 17 critical infrastructures that have been identified by the Department of Homeland Security. So they're trying to cause issues with either denial of service attacks or disruption of services. The other thing we saw is that they are actually trying to get people to change their direct deposit accounts so that payroll will now go into the attackers' accounts. So we actually saw that here at the university where the attackers were impersonating an employee. They did not actually get control of the employee's email account, but they were just spoofing the employee's name and sent an email to our payroll office asking to do a direct deposit bank account number change. Luckily, the employee and the payroll office noticed that this was a fraudulent email and did not act on it. But these are the type of things that the attackers will also be doing. And there's this other thing about business email compromise attacks. And I'm gonna actually have a slide on that where the FBI have some very specific topics and things that you can look out for so that you're not a victim of financial loss because of these types of attacks. And our children are online more, and that makes them targets for things like cyberbullying, harassment, and exploitation. all the times that they were in school and not necessarily online, that has now been shifted. So they are spending much more time online. And many times parents or adults, they aren't able to supervise their children. And like all of us, while we're online, supposedly working or doing our schoolwork, we might get distracted and then start looking at, doing personal things, and might make them lose focus and then perhaps more vulnerable to clicking on some of these phishing, social engineering type of attacks. The other thing is that we're now using video conferencing more often. So normally now our cameras are turned on more often than not. So making sure that only legitimate activities are using the camera and are recording things properly. Okay. So this was the slide I mentioned about to be on the alert for specific business email types of attacks. And specifically, the FBI is advising you to look out for things where it's an email that has a sense of urgency that says, I am requiring payment now. Please use this account to deposit payment to, or send a check immediately to something, or wire email to, wire funds transfer to a place that isn't your normal way of how you would normally transact business. They're changing email communications, and sometimes they will actually set up phone banks, like call this phone number to verify a transaction. But that new phone number is now controlled by the attacker. Oftentimes they'll only communicate by email and will not communicate by phone. And you should clearly take that as a signal that something's wrong with this particular transaction. They're requesting advance payment of services, and again, requests from employees to change your direct deposit information. These are all just some signals and triggers that you can look for. But the other thing you need to think about is, when is a transaction sounding not right? We have gut instincts, and generally we're pretty good about recognizing this in our physical world, but we have to apply that same gut instinct to our online presence. It might be a communication from an established vendor, from an email account that you normally conduct business with, but let's say that particular email you're receiving from the sender sounds funny. It sounds like it's not their normal communications method. It's not their normal cadence of how they speak, but really take that as a heads up that something's not right, and then pick up the phone and call the individual. Remember, we still have alternate means of communication. It does not have to be all electronic. It can be by telephone, right? So some of the cyber risks that happen when now we're working from home is that you don't necessarily have the same business protections that you had previously. You had managed firewalls. You might have had the desktops managed where updates were performed automatically. You might have had IT specialists that were monitoring for unusual activities. And some of you may not have had the ability to send your employees home with a work laptop or a work computing device. So now they're using their own personally owned computers. Are they sharing that computer with others? Are they patching it regularly? Is antivirus installed and up to date? We really want to stress that they should try to keep their work cyber environment separate from their personal cyber environment. So if they do not have a separate personal computer to use, just have them create a new account to use just for work. And think about the information that the employee or even you are accessing. Are you having to connect to your company network from home or a company server from home using a virtual private network? So now you're extending your company network to your home environment. Is your home environment going to be as protected as your work environment was? Or if you're carrying information home on paper, on an external hard drive or a USB thumb drive, are you going to secure that device as securely as you would in the office? You have to identify the business assets that are important to you. And remember that not all business transactions should be conducted from home. As an example, I heard of a situation where, you know, an individual was responsible for printing business checks to pay vendors and suppliers, and this individual was now mandated to work from home. Well, they wanted to take the check printer home with them, with the company checks, and that just did not seem like a very good idea. You know, really, you need to analyze the risk, and should that process be conducted at home? Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. And then identify what that information is that is so vital to your business operations that you cannot live without it. We call these the crown jewels. You know, identify what that is, and then determine who needs to access that information remotely, how that information will be accessed remotely, and how it's going to be protected remotely. Now, remember, you know, you've got a lot of other things you're worrying about right now, just basics. Will your business be able to continue to run? But should there be a breach where that information were either stolen, ransomware, where you no longer have access to it, or that there was a data breach, is there a reputational damage to your company that will also force you to no longer be able to function, right? That could just drive your business completely out of business. And also, if you have something happen to that information, make sure you identify who should be called. If it's an employee that it happens to, do they know who to call immediately? And do you have a remediation plan? And that remediation plan might be, you know, knowing what IT company can come in to help you to identify what happened, and if there's a way to get your information back, and exactly what the damages might be. And bottom line is, you know, now that you're accessing your crown jewel information remotely, make sure that it's still protected, just as if you were in the office. And again, remember that some things are not good candidates for you being used to work from home. So now that we're transitioning to working from home, you know, we're relying on a whole bunch of new tools and technologies. And right now, a lot of companies are offering their services for free. And I think about it as, you know, think about it as being free as a sick puppy might be. Because just because it's free, it doesn't mean that there isn't things on the back end that you might be liable for, that you might have to pay for later on. Make sure that you read the company's privacy and security policies, including terms and conditions. You don't actually have a contractual business relationship with them. And then think about what happens to the data. Let's say it's a data storage company in the cloud. You know, at the end of your free period, do they agree to delete all of your sensitive information and ensuring that there's no backup copies maintained? And I say read the terms and conditions very closely, because the university, we actually had a case where a business contract said that they could use the university's information for as long as they wanted in perpetuity for any reason that they saw fit. And that was, you know, after the contract was signed and we read that, we go, oh my goodness, we cannot allow this to happen. So we actually had to do a contract amendment. But these things do show up in terms and conditions, so you need to be aware of them. We're now using a whole bunch of video conferencing apps and other types of collaboration apps because everybody's remote, but you still want to be able to communicate. You still want to be able to do business. We're conducting this via a video conferencing session, but you need to make sure that most of these video conferencing applications are all just about at the same place in terms of security and privacy. There's been a lot of press about how Zoom is insecure and they don't protect the privacy of individuals. But again, they are going from 10 million users to 200 million users, and they're definitely under a microscope. I just got off a conference with Zoom and some of the higher education community, and it was reassuring to hear that Zoom is really addressing all of these issues very quickly. And the same would be for any of the other video conferencing applications. Just make sure that you set the settings for maximum privacy and security, and then just make sure that you're on listservs or mailing lists so that you're aware of any security issues, and then correct them by updating the software as soon as possible. And the same thing for collaboration applications. We hear about things about Microsoft Teams, an application called Slack, where basically everybody's in the same window and you're typing to each other, and it's like a big chat session. Again, there's ways that you can change the settings to adjust it for maximum privacy and security. Same thing, be alert for security issues and patch as soon as possible. I know a lot of you are concerned about Zoom. Some of the federal government agencies are saying that you can no longer use Zoom. This link at the very bottom is actually talking about the other applications beyond Zoom that companies are now relying on. So there's just one slide now specifically about Zoom bombing. And a Zoom bombing is where an uninvited individual drops into your Zoom meeting and then starts doing all sorts of disruptive activities. Things like pulling up the whiteboard or taking over the screen and then running all unauthorized or some of our malicious types of activities. And so that link at the very top will actually provide with some specific settings that you can adjust to prevent that from happening. And the next thing about protecting the Zoom meetings, these are very specific requirements that you can set up for your Zoom meetings. And that third bullet is from the National Institutes of Standard and Technologies, NIST, N-I-S-T, and they actually have a bunch of good advice about things that you can do immediately to protect your virtual meetings. And really, we're coming to the part of the presentation where it's really about things that you can do and have your employees do to make sure that the environments are as secure as possible. So, and these are just basic good cyber hygiene practices. So think of it now as in our COVID-19 era where we're social distancing, we're washing our hands frequently, and wearing masks. So those are hygiene practices. So now we're applying cyber hygiene practices to our work from home environments. So number one, just make sure you're secure in your home network. If you've not already done so, make sure that your router default administrative password is changed, and just keep your router software up to date, as you would for any of your other computing devices that are being used. Ensure that you're updating software on all of your devices, make sure you have antivirus installed and is up to date. And I cannot stress this enough, use strong passwords. The attackers are targeting your accounts. So the stronger your password is, the less likely they're going to be able to break it. We call this password cracking, where they're just using a computer to try and randomly generate passwords until they're successful in getting in. A way that you can help prevent attackers from gaining control over your accounts, even if their password is broken, is use multi-factor authentication if possible. And then again, we talked about this, just be alert for all of the new scams and phishings that are coming out. Okay. And remote workforce best practices, I'm just gonna pull them all up at one time, is we talked about keeping your cyber environment for work separate from your personal cyber environment. Talk about cyber social distancing. One of the things that you want to do is focus on work. And the best way to do that is if you're using a different computer, just use that computer for work. Often, if you're distracted doing personal emails, surfing the web, watching videos, you might not be as careful and might click on a malicious link, infect your home computer. And then if you're connected by a VPN to your company's network, you're now exposing your company's network to the infection from your home computer. Again, if you can't have a different computer to work on from home, create a new account with a strong password and just use that account for work. And ensure that you know what your valuable information is and secure that properly, both paper and electronic. When we talk about information security, it's just not about our digital protections. It's also about paper. We've had cases where a breach occurred because paper that had social security numbers were mishandled and stolen. So breaches can occur with paper. So if possible, don't save that sensitive information to your personal computer. If you're done with it, delete it. If you're printing sensitive information, do it only if you absolutely have to, and then shred it if you no longer need it. We went through this pretty quickly, but what I wanted to do right now is to leave you with some resources. And the good thing about all of these resources is they are free. So the Readiness Institute actually has some very good 1 or 2 page resources that you can distribute to your remote workers very quickly. And it's simple tips that they can do. Federal Trade Commission and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce also have very good advice for small and medium businesses, as well as remote workforces. The Department of Homeland Security Cyber Infrastructure Group has that website, the us-cert.gov, where they post alerts. And FBI, that's that page I talked about earlier in this session. So went through very quickly, but I know we have a couple of minutes for questions.
Absolutely, Jody. Thank you so much. And I'll let our webinar participants know that if you go to the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom window, you can ask a question of Jody. We'd really appreciate you doing that. Let's dive a little deeper into a couple of areas. So small businesses are looking keep sales going, and if they have employees working from home, they're dealing with those employees most likely accepting credit cards. And you touched on this briefly, but let's talk about the importance of paying attention to PCI, and that's the compliance aspect of accepting payments, and the dangers that are present when somebody's accepting credit card payments at home.
Right. So as you're accepting credit card payments, you know that you have to comply with the payment card industry security standards. And so if you're taking home that little terminal that you're swiping the cards in and moving it to your home, you're now potentially expanding your card data environment that you're assessed against to your home environment. And it's likely that your home environment is not going to be compliant with the PCI standards. So again, if you need to, maybe you should just go into the office once or twice a week to process those credit card payments. The other option is to switch your payment card transactions to what we call a point-to-point encrypted standard, P2PE, which is a payment card standard that kind of reduces the network implications in complying with PCI.
And then I want to just share a quick story about a business, know the owner, and an email came in. The bad guy was impersonating the business owner, and the email was sent to accounts payable that there was a consultant being hired, and that the consultant needed to be wired a down payment of, I think in this case, it was more than $20,000 for a project. Had to be done immediately. There was a sense of urgency. The employee, thinking that the email really was from the CEO of this small business, immediately went to work trying to figure out how to make it happen, because employees want to make their bosses happy and do what they're told. So immediately contacted the bank. Fortunately, the bank asked some questions through the process and got the actual owner involved in the conversation, who said, I never sent this email, learned that the email had been compromised. So those are the types of real world things that are happening right now because of how open we are to, and how susceptible, I should say, we are to these types of attacks.
Right. So remember I said that accounts are being targeted by the attackers because they're taking advantage of a trust relationship. So if I were able to gain your email account, Dale, I can go in and read all of the emails that are existing, identify the relationships, and insert myself into those conversation threads. So that's why it's also very important that if, for example, you sent me an email that was not in our normal cadence of conversations, and I said, oh, you told me immediately, you know, do this wired payment, it's urgent, you need to do it now, you know, I would call you and say, this is not sounding like you. Is it, you know, did you really say this? You know, don't execute a high value transaction without verifying it first, especially if it sounds suspicious or it's not part of the normal conversations that you have with that individual. Trust your gut.
Important to have these conversations. Business owners should be having these conversations and share this webinar with employees because it's a constant conversation. It's not something that's one and done. I can't just say, be safe online and leave it at that. Talk about the human psychology aspect of the need for reminders.
Absolutely. Because we're all focused on doing our individual businesses, right? As a small business, you want to just, make sure your business is running, making sure your employees are taken care of, make sure your customers are taken care of. Cybersecurity is not necessarily going to be top of mind. But really, you have to be a cybersecurity champion and make sure you offer reminders to your employees and even some of your suppliers and vendors too about good cyber hygiene practices. So we do this regularly within the university environment. We offer semesterly, webinars such as this, or we actually go on site and do in-person presentations, because again, you have to keep it top of mind for individuals. And we also use current events to help us.
Perfect. Jody, this has been so helpful. It's a fantastic reminder. I know there are a number of things going on in businesses that they're dealing with right now. We don't want the emergency of a cyber event to be something that pulls your eye off the game of keeping your business running during these trying times. And so a little bit of prevention right now goes a long way. And it's that ounce of prevention now in this area that will really help you later on. So we thank you for that. Thank you so much, Jody. This has been a huge help. I'm going to remind our viewers that this podcast will be uploaded to YouTube on our YouTube channel immediately. One of the best places to go for up-to-date information on all that is happening from Better Business Bureau is bbb-businesses.org/COVID, COVID-19. We have up-to-date information there. You'll see this webinar posted. You'll also be able to subscribe and register for an upcoming webinar as we take a look at how to and what's going on and how to access the funds that are available through the stimulus package. And that's coming up this coming Thursday at 2 o'clock Mountain Time. That'd be 1 o'clock Pacific and 10 a.m. Hawaii time. So we thank you so much, Jody, for being with us. All those resources are going to be in the chat box. We're going to make these webinars available at the recorded version. And with that, we're going to wrap this webinar up. Better Business Bureau is your source of up-to-the-date information regarding how to keep your business surviving and ultimately thriving through the COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.